Well, thanks again for joining us for another Holding Court, the Patreon-backed episode of the Dukes of Dice, and I am honored to be joined by Ted Alspach. Ted, how are you today?
Hi, I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Ted, where are you guys based out of?
We are just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay. Is it fall there yet? Because it just got to be fall here in St. Louis this week.
Yeah, exactly. It was just one week ago. I think it started getting cool, and the last couple of days, like early in the morning, you need a jacket outside, which is really different than it had been previous to that. It was in the 90s during the day for most of September and almost in the first week or so of October.
Well, for folks who don't know, Ted is with Bezier Games, a company best known for a lot of things, and we'll talk about a bunch of them, whether that be the Werewolf series, Suburbia, all sorts of fun things. But Ted, why don't we start off, as I kind of start off with a lot of folks, what was the first game you ever loved?
Well, truly loved. It probably goes back to back in the days when growing up, playing with my dad and my grandfather, and I would say probably Stratego. Stratego is probably one of those that I just I basically bugged my dad to play. Well, I bugged my mom, and she never played with me, but I bugged my dad to play with me all the time. I just love the game. I love the whole idea of like it's kind of when I look at it now, I'm like, aha, secret information. No wonder I liked it. But back then I was just, this is so exciting to, try and set up your stuff so that nobody can figure out, where your flag is and protect it. But, set up the false set of bombs so that they think it's on the other side of the board. And that just, I think for years, I was just engrossed with that, and I really enjoyed it.
And did the tastes evolve from there? Were there other games that were in that era that you also enjoyed, or I don't know? For me, for instance, I had a couple that from a young age I really dug, and then you split ways with board games for a bit and then rediscover it. Was that the case with you, or was there kind of a constant thread of games for you?
Yeah, definitely, ups and downs. Certainly, in addition to Stratego, there's all the other classics, Parker Brothers type classics of Risk and Life and Monopoly and everything else that's their careers, masterpiece. I mean, just you name it. We had a whole bunch of games. I love playing them, throughout there. I would say that in the 80s was probably a bit of a dip for me for games, except for Dungeons and Dragons, which we played in high school and played with my friends and things. So did a lot of that, did a little bit of that in college, but not a lot of board games, much more video games at that time, kind of shifted into video games for a while. And then at some point in the 90s, that changed back to board games again. And well, video games still never went away, but board games just became a bigger and bigger part of my gaming focus.
With D&D, did you have a favorite character?
Not really. I like doing stuff. It's funny. There's the last time I played D&D is probably more than 10 years ago. And we just it's just so much fun to, get into that mode again and that sort of thing. But no, I don't think there's any particular type or role or character that I really liked. I liked DMing. I liked making maps. For me, that was, I would do that, and I'm sitting in class. I don't know what class it was, but I just remember with graph paper, making dungeons, making maps and notes. And, that part of the game for me was as much fun as playing with other people.
Very cool. And it looks like, from looking at the design track record, it was interesting to me to see the heavy computer background, a lot of stuff at Adobe. For folks who don't know that part of the Ted Alspach background, what did that look like? The product, I see group product manager with Adobe Illustrator, dealt a lot with Creative Suite. What was that time like?
Yeah, so basically, once I have a marketing degree. Once I got out of school, I really wanted to focus in my head. I guess growing up watching things like Bosom Buddies and 30-something, I thought advertising was like the coolest profession possible. And so I have a marketing degree, and it was kind of focused on graphic design. I really enjoyed that aspect. And one of the first jobs I had was with a small computer company that was going in and basically taking people going from their analog systems for typesetting and design to digital systems. And so it was like, the early Macs and back when PageMaker and those products had come out. And so I was doing a lot of that, and I was interested in writing at the time. So I started writing books, and I had written in the 90s, I wrote a whole bunch of books on desktop publishing, on Illustrator and Quark Express and Photoshop and things like that. And eventually I ended up getting a position at Adobe and that I ended up being the group product manager, and then for Adobe Illustrator, and also for the Creative Suite when the Creative Suite first came around. And so I was there for about 7 years, and that was pretty exciting. I enjoyed that, and that was a fantastic background and a great set of experiences to help me when I started the Bezier Games business, because you do a lot of things in product management in terms of dealing with all sorts of people across the company.
Well, and to what degree did the graphic design part of things come in too? Because I have to imagine being able to think visually also gave you a leg up once you made that transition back into the game space.
That was incredibly helpful. I think the experience I had, particularly with Illustrator, just being able to go ahead and create things. And, I do that pretty much in Illustrator. I would say pretty much every single day I use Illustrator to some extent, whether it's working on prototypes, touching up box designs, all sorts of things. And that has become incredibly useful. It's like one of those incredibly useful tools that I've had over time that I think has really helped. We still have a graphic designer because I have a limited design skills, but the fact that I can go in there and I can edit things and I can make my own prototypes and make them very quickly and, be able to use these tools pretty well, that helps a lot.
Do you have your copy of Illustrator for free, or do you have to subscribe like everyone else?
I have to subscribe like everyone else now. It's funny, right before I left, I was the last year or so, I was part of a committee, and people might not like me for this, but we realized at the time, when I was there, for most of the time I was there, it was, people were initially floppy disks, then it went to CD-ROMs, and very, very little downloading of it. Just the bandwidth wasn't there at the time. But I was on this committee to get people to subscribe, to actually have a subscription, as opposed to purchasing, a version and then purchasing an upgrade and that sort of a thing, because we could kind of see that's where things were going. And we were working on figuring out how to do that and how to make that actually work for the Creative Suite products. And had I known at this point that I'd be shelling out, I don't know how much it is a month for all the products, I might have reconsidered. But at the time, it made a lot of sense for a business. And it's kind of the only way to really have a software business at this point for something like Adobe with the wide variety of products they have.
As someone who's a frequent Lightroom user, I can tell you that, it's no thank you for that aspect of things, but I get it. I definitely get it.
Yeah. Yep.
So what spurred on the creation of Bezier?
Well, I had been, just interested in designing games, and I had made a whole bunch of really, really crappy games, both as a kid and as a young adult. And, some of them, in the 90s when I was thinking, wow, it'd be really fun to get a game published, I had sent stuff. I sent stuff to Cheap Ass Games and a couple other game companies, and they were terrible. They were really terrible, and I'm so embarrassed that I did that. But at the time, I just didn't know any better in terms of what constitutes good game design or interesting. And I did the same thing that I'm sure a lot of new designers do, which is I played with my friends. We liked it. We thought it was cool. We're like, you know what? People would buy this, and so send it in, and I'll probably want to publish this. And most of the publishers at the time, and of course back then, it was sending a lot of stuff just through. You package it up in a package and send it off, and hope you get a response at some point in the mail. And a few times I did get a response. Normally, I didn't get anything back ever. They probably looked at it and go, and just threw it away and didn't even want to look at it. But people were very, very nice, very encouraging. That's that sort of thing is really nice when you get a note from someone, a rejection note, but it's still a nice note that says, hey, this isn't exactly what we're looking for, but here's a tip or two, or you might want to try this. And such nice feedback for people in the industry who did respond. That was kind of nice. So, it's one of those things I try and keep in mind as, we get submissions all the time from designers, and it's hard to keep up with those and to actually give them, enough time to really consider, is this something we want to follow up on? But, always try and, give them as much encouragement as possible. And I think that helps a lot for people who are, trying to break into the industry.
Yeah, for sure. What is it that was at the core of Bezier's philosophy as a company? Obviously, that kind of thing evolves over time, but what do you think has come to be the hallmark of Bezier, if you had to define it?
Yeah, so we came up with the tagline about 5 years ago called the New Classics, and the idea behind that is that every single game we put out there, we would we do everything we can for that game to be something that sticks around for a long time, that we're going to do multiple reprints of, that, if we do, we might do expansions for it or other versions of it and that sort of thing. And I mean, that's really our goal with every game we put out there. It's very rare. There's maybe a couple of games that we put out there that we're like, well, let's see if this works, because maybe people will be excited. But for the most part, we really spent a lot of effort on trying to come up with games that are things that they're just going to have a long appeal, that they're going to have just a long, long tail. For us, that's worked out fairly well. With games like Suburbia and Castle, strategy games that have lasted for a long time, that are still selling. The original versions of those are selling. I guess Suburbia is 7 years now. It's been around. The Werewolf games, are doing really well over time. But that whole idea of that, people look at our games and go, you know what, the Bezier games, they're high quality. I might pick up this game today, but you know what, 2 years from now, I'll still see it on the shelf. It's not one of those things that you're going to only see, this fall, and then it's gone. You'll never see it again. And that really is our goal with pretty much everything that we publish, is to have something out there that's really replayable and that is going to be interesting to people 5 years from now. And it's not just kind of hey, this is the cool, let's do a roll and write because everyone else is doing roll and writes right now. But it's more of, hey, well, if we have a great idea for a roll and write that we think could actually maintain and kind of sustain for a long time, sure. But otherwise, it's really about, really solid games that we think really have a lot of long-term potential.
Well, and given how crowded the space is these days, having a game that isn't forgettable, I think, is almost as important as having a game that's hot.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's so hard right now. There are so many games. I think we're at not quite 1,200 for Essen this year so far, which is amazing. Given that 10 years ago it was 400, 500 games. So that's amazing. I mean, it's great as a gamer. I'm very excited. Although I have to say, it's a little overwhelming. Just going through that list, I finally have gone through the list and weeded out things. But I'm down to like 120 or something of things that I'm interested in. But still, that's a lot of games, and there's no. And of course, I have to work at a booth, and I have meetings, and I'm not going to have time to go really look at these things. So yeah. Even if I did have the entire fair, there's no way you can play 120 games or even sit in and really get a good sense of those games at that time. So that's a little overwhelming, I think. And 1,100 games, unless you've really taken the time ahead of time to research, you have no idea, what's going to be there. And yeah, it's overwhelming at this point.
Going back a little bit, you had mentioned you had designed a whole bundle of games back in the day. Do you recall what the very first one was?
The first one that I remember really well, that I spent a lot of time on myself and my best friend down the street, we did a lot of different types of games. We had been playing Tactics 2, the old Avalon Hill game. I don't know why I was playing that, but we liked it. And I still think it's it's a very cool little chit type war game. And so we were inspired to do something, but we decided to make it actually do a paper mache terrain board. And it was, and again, always hard to tell because you're trying to remember back in the day, but it was pretty big. I would say 2 or 3 feet by 2 or 3 feet for the board that we made, that actually had, real mountains and real rivers in terms of, indents. And it was on a big grid, and we came up with the rules for it. And, that was pretty exciting. And I think, again, the appeal to that was more of making the game, probably more than playing it. I don't remember playing it that much, but I do remember sitting around in my best friend's basement, just working on this board and come up with the rules and all the discussions we had and trying to figure out how the game was going to work. And that was probably again, it being the most memorable and thing that I can remember. It's pretty clear why that I'm, still publishing and designing games at this point.
Where did social deduction and Werewolf come into play for you?
So when I first started, playing games, I think one of the games I really liked in the 90s was Illuminati by Steve Jackson's games, and that had a little bit of that element in it. When I was first introduced to kind of a generic werewolf type game, I was really compelled. Wow, this is really great. And when I was playing that a lot, I was very frustrated in that the commercial versions out there didn't have a lot of the things that I wanted, whether it was the nice art on the cards or descriptions on the cards. The rules were kind of funky and not too clear. Just all sorts of, it was hard to balance games. Sometimes no one wants to play an hour-long game only to realize halfway through that, it's decidedly unbalanced one way or the other, that sort of thing. And so, because of that, that's really where the original Ultimate Werewolf game came from, was looking at all these different things and the way that people had been playing games and the games I had played, and trying to come up with a system that made it just much more user-friendly and much more accessible than otherwise. And just because as many people who do play those games, they're just drawn to them. It's pretty amazing. It's still one of those things that it shows and other things. People come up to me and they're so excited because, whether it's One Night or Ultimate Werewolf or whatever game, you can just see in their eyes that they're sucked in, they're addicted, and they love playing those games. And that's certainly how I was initially, and I still love playing those games. But yeah, it just drew me in, and for me, it was, how can I make this a better experience? There's so many issues. I think one of the Looney Labs version of the game, you basically kill off someone on the very first night, which is this horrible, bitter taste in your mouth for ever playing the game again if you're that person, or if you're that person's friend who's going to complain about it for forever. So things like that I was like, oh, these can be fixed. We can address these things and make the game better for everyone, possibly. So that was definitely kind of a goal of mine, to make the games like that better than they were, and to really kind of customize it the way I wanted to play it.
Did you think at the time that it would prove to be such a big part of Bezier, that there would be so many games that would stem from that one core game?
No, absolutely not. In fact, Ultimate Werewolf was definitely our first big game in terms of selling it. It just kept on selling out. We'd print, I think the first print run, well, the very first game was the white box, what's now called the white box edition, which was the hand cut version of the game, which I basically printed and cut all the cards myself and put them in these really flimsy white boxes, and put a bunch of stuff in them and sent them out. And I did that for 800 copies. And that's kind of ridiculous.
That's a lot of cutting. Man.
It's a ridiculous amount of cutting and assembling, and I can do that sort of thing, like put some TV on in the background or whatever, and do that. But yuck. Once there's a certain point I got to, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, we should really be producing this for real. So I did a print run of 2,000, which at the time I thought was, I'm like, this will last me for years, because I did 800 over the course of a year. If you're 2,000, a couple of years of this, and those sold out almost instantly. And so then I did another print run, and I just kind of the cool thing, Bezier Games kind of grew from this nice little organic shell, where it was never the goal for Bezier Games to become, a big company that puts out these big releases every couple of years. It was more of, hey, I just want to, get enough out there. And I was very, very super conservative in terms of how many I was printing. Bezier Games has never borrowed money to print anything. We just basically funded everything, as it came in. Those first 800 copies of Ultimate Werewolf paid for the print run for the 2,000 copies that we did initially. That 2,000 copies sold, we paid for the next May. I think it was 3,000 for the second print run, and then the 5,000 print run, and then 10,000 print run after that. And then some of that money was used to, for other games, like eventually Suburbia and Castles and, all the other games that we did. So it kind of all stemmed from that. But I certainly had no idea that we would do a bunch of social deduction games. After Ultimate Werewolf, it was more of, well, this one's great. I'm going to go back to the other stuff that I like doing, which are kind of like Euro game style games that I was enjoying playing, and work on designing those. And I thought that would be the bulk of our business. And it's part of it, certainly, but it's certainly not as big a part as the social deduction part is.
Why do you think this question comes from BJ from Board Game Gumbo from our Board Game Geek Guild? Why are social deduction games so popular in your mind?
Well, there is that aspect that I mentioned before. There's something addicting about them, and I think part of it is there's a lot of the game takes place in your head. There are very few components for a lot of social deduction games, certainly for Werewolf and One Night Ultimate Werewolf. Whereas, there's very, very basic rules, and it's really you thinking through what these possibilities are and trying to outsmart everyone else at the table. And it's in a way of, you really have a lot of control over what happens. It's always one of the things that I've liked about Euro games versus, the more traditional kind of, dungeon romp type games where a lot of dice are in play and you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. You have to wait till the cards get turned over, or the dice get rolls, but you really have a lot of control over what's going to happen to you and how other players are going to be affected. And that happens quite a bit with social deduction, in that you don't know everything that's going on out there, but it's your decisions, and it's really your ability to come to a conclusion about, who's telling the truth, what parts of what they're saying are correct, and how you can kind of pull out the right information from the discussion that's taking place. And, I think there's, like I said, there's a lot that goes on in your head when you're playing social deduction. That is really compelling. It's really interesting, trying to figure things out. And also, while you're trying to figure that out, at the same time, you're trying to make sure that, people either they realize that you're on a good team, or that they think you're on a good team when you're not, and how to convince them of that. And so, it's fully engaging. It's very interesting. A lot of people will play Ultimate Werewolf into the middle of the night. You go to cons and you'll see people in the corridors there, and they're there all night. They're there literally until 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning playing Werewolf. And that's because time kind of just passes by. You have no idea how much time has gone by. You're really tired, but you just don't, because you're just so engaged with the game. And that's part of it. I think one of the reasons that it's just very few games have you that intensely involved as social deduction does.
Are you any good at Werewolf?
Yes and no. If I am anonymous, I think I can do pretty well. The problem is when people know it's me and they know anything about me and what I do, I have a big problem. Then I either have to get lucky and, like in one night, if I'm the tanner, I'm going to kick butt because everyone's going to kill me because they want to kill me because I'm Ted Alspach.
I can tell Ted Alspach. Perfect. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I can get away with it for a while when people don't know me, or in a group with a lot of people that everyone knows everyone, and we all have that sort of thing. And I can do fairly well. But with the majority of that I play, I tend to play with people who know who I am and what I do, but they don't know, and I don't know as much about them. And so I tend to be a target because of that. So that is unfortunate. Although I have to say, when they do keep me alive and I'm on a good team, I tend to help out a lot, for a regular traditional game of Ultimate Werewolf. I'm pretty good at figuring out, what people are saying, what they're doing, and catching, little things to figure things out. I'm certainly not always right, but I like to think that I have a pretty good track record of that. Everything except for my wife. She plays, and she's an amazing werewolf. And, I try to always suspect her, but at the same time, I give her way too much benefit of the doubt. And then she kills me. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
That's how it goes. Yeah. Sometimes there's just that one person you can't quite read.
Yep.
Ugh. Blinded by love, maybe in that case, Ted. All right, Suburbia. Let's move over to Suburbia, because that's the other one of the other big ones from Bezier. What was the origin story of Suburbia? How did that come about?
So, for Suburbia, as I mentioned before, I love video games, computer games. I played a ton of SimCity. I like sim games in general, Roller Coaster Tycoon, and, certainly SimCity and The Sims, and pretty much all those. I enjoy those quite a bit. And there was a game, there actually is a SimCity, the card game, that came out in maybe the mid 2000s or so, it was a collectible card game, oddly enough. You purchased packs of cards that are related to different cities, but it wasn't very good, unfortunately. And there really hadn't been at that time any really good city building games. And, it seemed to me that, wow, it seemed like again, at the time, such an obvious thing, like, wow, there should be a tile lane city building game, because, this is kind of like, if you think about, SimCity or how that works, you're adding buildings, you're adding zones to this area, and it becomes more interesting, and things connect together in a very interesting way. And so, that was definitely the inspiration was, let's do a board game version of SimCity that really feels like you're building something. And that's kind of where that came from. Initially, it was square tiles. It actually looked a little bit more like SimCity. You'll notice that the colors in Suburbia actually match the colors of the zones in SimCity. They pretty much are one-to-one with the zones there. But I did square tiles. That didn't really work. I shelved it for a while, came back, went to hex tiles for some reason just kind of like, hey, let's try that. And things just came together really, really well with that. I ended up getting a fantastic developer, Dale Yu, who did the development for Dominion. He was just coming off of that, and I'd done some playtesting on different Dominion, like the base game and some expansions. And I really liked working with him. And he worked as a developer with me on that. And I think we ended up getting, turning the game into something that was really special at the time.
For the record, SimCity, the card game, released in 1994.
Oh, it's
average rating on Board Game Geek. Do you want to guess what the average rating for this on 448 ratings is?
I would just say it's in the 5s or 6s.
No, it's worse than that. It's a 4.4. Yeah. Not great. Published by Mayfair Games in 1994. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize Mayfair did that.
At least this is all per BGG, which is usually pretty accurate. So.
Yeah, I have a copy of it somewhere upstairs, but it's been so long.
Man, that'd be fun to pull out at some point, I would think.
Fun to pull out and look at. I think again, playing it was not a great experience. So I don't think I would invest the time to play through a game. But maybe.
Was there one key decision you made during the development of Suburbia that you think led to it being as big of a success as it has been?
The little thing that I mentioned about going from squares to hexes, having that increased interactivity between things. But I think the biggest thing was there's one aspect of the game that everything ties together in a game typically. One aspect that, for whatever reason, just I think works really well, and that's those annoying red lines on the score track, the population board. That once your population increases to a certain amount, it decreases your income and your reputation. And over time, it keeps doing that. And it's kind of this constant push of, I want more income, I want more reputation. But as I'm doing that, my population is increasing. And of course, that's the goal of the game. But as it gets higher, that lowers that income and reputation. So I have to keep buying and doing that. And it's a very nice cycle. And I think it has this really nice flow to it where, you're trying to increase these things constantly to get more money, to purchase better buildings, to get better reputation, which will drive up your population. But as your population goes up, it hurts your income and your reputation, and you have to purchase other things to increase those. And it's a really nice little self-feeding system that had worked really, really well. So I think that by itself, that particular component of the game works incredibly well. And it's one of those things that's fairly unique to Suburbia. I really think I've really seen that anywhere else.
Yeah. I will confess, it is one of the games that gets mentioned as sort of an evergreen and one that has been around for a while that I have yet to actually play. I've yet to actually play it, so I need to get around to that at some point. I have played just about everything else, though, that we're talking about. Christopher John had a question that I think is particularly interesting for Bezier, because I can imagine this is a big dilemma for you guys. He asks whether you feel that there's a tension between developing quote-unquote sure thing products that have a high chance of succeeding and being at least fairly profitable, anything in One Night, anything Werewolf, anything that's a deluxe edition of for instance, deluxe edition of Suburbia, or the balance between that and venturing out into more unknown territory, something that might be slightly riskier, especially given, as we talked about earlier, just how oversaturated the market is.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it has not gotten easier. We happened to do very, very well with our Suburbia Collector's Edition earlier this year. And that just makes it even harder right now, because personally, I would love to just do new stuff. I would like to come out. I mean, there's so many different games that I've worked on that are in various stages that I'd like to bring forward. And, I know deep down inside that, one or two of those may do really well for us, and that'd be fantastic. But at the same time, doing that collector's edition of Suburbia, there's nothing that's going to catch up to that as a new release. At this point, I mean, that was just did phenomenally well, and it's not even out. That was just the Kickstarter version. That the game itself is doing really well as far as pre-sales and things. And of course, doing additional versions of One Night and expansions to Ultimate Werewolf, that sort of thing. Those are easy, but they're certainly they don't excite me as much. Well, Suburbia excited me just because at the time we did Suburbia, the first version of Suburbia, it was very limited budget, and again, it was kind of one of those that was our first real big box game, and we only produced, I think it was 2,000 copies. And it sold out right away, and so we used the money for that to fund the next 3,000 copies. That's the same sort of cycle, but it's pretty risky for any publisher to publish more than a couple thousand games when they're a brand new publisher, even if they really, everybody feels like their game's going to do well or you wouldn't publish it. But, you never really know for sure. And, even some of the games that we've published since then that we've thought, this is going to take off, and it just, kind of limps out of the gate, and, people like it, it's fine, but it just doesn't really grab people the same way that some of our other games have. But yeah, it's there's new stuff we're working on right now. There's a new game from Scott Caputo, who did Whistle Stop, that we'll be publishing next year. I'm very excited about that. I think it's a fantastic follow up to that game, to the Whistle Stop game. There's a brand new game that I'm working on, a strategy game that again have Daily U as a developer on, that we've been working on now for several months, and I'm pretty excited about that. But as a publisher, I also know, boy, it's so easy to step back and just do another version of One Night because, that's kind of a guaranteed sort of thing for the business. We're in a very fortunate position that we have games like One Night and Suburbia that continue to sell, over time, and that have done really well for us. And that it gives us the luxury, I think, of being able to, explore some newer games and not worry and not have us, the company isn't riding on, the success of a brand new title typically, which is really nice. And,
it seems like the security of those established brands allows you to be in a position to take more risks. Although, from a cash flow perspective, I imagine it's always tempting to say, well, we put out another Werewolf thing, we know we have the audience for it. We put another Suburbia thing, we know we definitely have the audience for that based off of Kickstarter. I'm sure there's that temptation there too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, and there's only so much time, and, we're a pretty small company. We have a total of 7 full-time employees, including myself and my wife. Up until 2-3 years ago, we didn't have any full-time employees except for myself and my wife. So we're still very, very small in terms of the amount of manpower that we have and what we're able to do. And, in such a crowded market too, again, it's kind of one of those things. We put out 10 games, 7 or 8 of them are probably just going to get lost. And yeah, they might sell a couple thousand copies, but again, that's not really what we want to do. That's not our mission. Our mission is to really, publish games out there that continue to sell and really over time do really well. So, we've been limiting ourselves to just a few new games each year. Certainly this year is a good example of that, where it's basically one brand new game that we've done. And everything else is kind of, accessories or expansions, or the Suburbia Collector's Edition, that sort of thing.
And even then, still a pretty good year.
Oh yeah, no complaints here.
The next one I want to talk about, and literally, if I went through the whole Ted Alspach catalog, this would be a 3-hour long interview, and I think you'd be very annoyed at me. So I'm gonna skip around a little bit. The other one I was interested in talking about was Werewords. Kind of moving back into the Werewolf side of thing. This is although you've had some other breakout titles, this is the one that actually caught the Spiel judges, caught that panel's attention. It was a Spiel nominee this year. Let's go back to the design of that game. What was the origins of Werewords?
So, I'm a fan of word games, liked word games a lot. Hadn't ever really done one, at least nothing that was worth publishing. And I think it was, Codenames had been very popular for a while. We played a lot of Codenames. Some things I like about Codenames, some things I didn't. The worst part about Codenames for me is that when you're just sitting there and you are just struggling to come up with a word that connects anything, you've got maybe 4 words left, and you're just, how can I possibly connect any of these things without, the assassin tile coming up? And, there's a lot of silence. You're just sitting there and it's quiet and no one's really talking. And, I was thinking one time playing that was, it'd be really cool if you had bigger teams of Codenames and one of the people on one of the teams was actually a traitor, was actually, suggesting, saying, hey, we should say this and this, knowing that would probably get the assassin selected by the other team, or there's a good likelihood of that. And I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. It really wouldn't work for Codenames for a variety of reasons, but I just thought that idea was really neat. So the whole idea of a traitor in a word game, something, like Password or any traditional word game where you're trying to guess a word, and you have someone that is on purpose giving you clues that just are taking you in the wrong direction or subtly pushing you in the wrong direction. And they're just trying to get away with it. That to me seemed really, really interesting. And that's kind of where the genesis of Werewords came from. And it wasn't, at the time, it wasn't werewolf themed. It was more of, I think what was like Mole and Fink was one of the names for it at one point. That sort of thing where you have, someone who knows who's on the inside and someone who's trying to rat you out. And it was all sorts of things like that. But I really like that idea of, the giving a clue that's the wrong type of clue, as opposed to figuring out who is a traitor because they're doing something wrong. It was a more of a subtle sort of thing. So that's kind of where that came from.
At what point did you become aware of Insider? Did that whole thing come into play?
Yeah, so that came. I think we saw that at Essen at 1 year, and I'd been working at Werewords for a while, and that's when I had looked at that and going, this is sort of what I was doing, but different. But there's some things here that I did that were just different from what they had done. There were some things I didn't like and some things I did like. I liked that it was the Oink packages are always very cool. They're nice and small and tight. And so, I contacted them about that whole, hey, I got some ideas here. If you want to, maybe we could talk about licensing this. And, I said some different ideas about changing things. And initially there was a response, and then there was no response. There was nothing there, totally nothing at all. And I learned later, I had heard from other people that Oink doesn't want anyone to modify their stuff, which I totally get and respect, because we feel the same way, that if we're going to, license a game to someone in another language, they really aren't allowed to change anything. We, outside of the language and any language specific issues they may have or cultural issues, we really don't want anything in the gameplay changed. But the problem was they never said that to me. So, had I known that, I would have just said, "Oh, okay, all right, well, thanks,
move on your way." Yeah,
move on. Yeah, but they never responded at all, which is just kind of weird. After a couple of follow-ups, but whatever. The end product, Werewords, ends up being quite different than Insider. Yes, there's the 20 questions-esque sort of thing, but the whole premise of Insider is that you kind of have a bad guy who is helping, as opposed to a bad guy who's hurting. And you don't really have that with Werewords. You have two teams with Werewords. You have people who don't want you to guess the word and people who do want you to guess the word. And with Insider, everyone's trying to guess the word. And the Insider is just trying to be sneaky about it. And it's, the games just feel very, very different if you've played both of them. And
so has that? I know obviously they made a bit of a stink at the time, and this was a couple of years ago when this blew up. Has that fence been mended at all, or is it still kind of back where it was at the time? They're upset, and you had your response.
I've reached out to them a few times. Just there was never any intent to go, hey, I got a game that's like this but better. That was never obviously the intention. That's kind of silly. But it was more of the timing. It was unfortunate for both of us, because the game I was working on was in a it was in a pretty good state, and it just happened to come out 9 months or so after theirs. But I think for them, before they saw the game, they kind of jumped the gun and responded before they actually saw the rules or the game. I think once they had actually seen the game, what it is, there might not have been there. There's still, I understand there's still some comparisons to be drawn, but at the same time, they're really different games. They have totally different feels. And some people like Insider better than Werewords and vice versa, because they do have those different feels. There's not, they're just different games. There's so many word games out there where you're trying to figure out a word through all sorts of ways. And, Werewords has a traitor, Insider doesn't really. They're a very, very basic form. That's kind of the difference. You got two teams in Werewords, and you only have one team in Insider with a person that is trying to get away with doing something.
I will tell you my some of my favorite moments in Werewords come from that difference. Being Mayor Wolf is so unbelievably satisfying in that game. I the first time I got that role, the word that the app gave me was Notre Dame. Or Notre Dame, however you want to pronounce it. And actually, the difference in pronunciation kind of helped me too. Someone asked me, is this in North America? And I said, maybe. Get to take advantage
awesome.
of the ambiguity. It was beautiful.
Great.
The only other situation, and then I can't remember if I was Werewolf or if I was just a werewolf. No, I was I was a werewolf, and my friend Sean was the mayor, and the word was, this was very late at night at Dice Tower Con one year. The word was Cheetos. He thought it was Cheerios, or vice versa. It was one of those two. And so he was answering and giving very bad information based off of his complete misinterpretation of the clue. And even though it was sort of obvious that I was the werewolf, after it was revealed what the word was, oops, everyone pinned him as the werewolf, even though he was just tired. and had made a terrible mistake. So, no, I will tell you the fact that that's a possibility in that game is incredibly satisfying. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that is the fact that's a possibility and that is, I think, one of those things in Social One Night and in Ultimate Werewolf that you're never quite sure. And because those are possibilities that are out there, it changes the way you play. And even if that's not the case, the mayor's a werewolf, a very small percentage of the time, but because they could be, boy, it just makes you double think things, and it just makes it a lot richer.
Well, it keeps you engaged when other people are asking questions, and it keeps you engaged in two puzzles: what's the word, and who done it? Who's the werewolf? So yeah, no, I found that game has worked really well, especially with newer gamers too. That tends to be a nice little gateway game, and I think that's part of the reason it got the nomination. What was it like getting that nomination? Was that a big moment?
Oh, that was thrilling. We had gotten a recommendation for One Night Ultimate Werewolf back in 2015. They recommended it, and they basically called out the integration of the app and that sort of thing. So that was very cool at the time, because I was like, wow, these people know I exist. That's cool. To see that there, I'd heard a couple that, just from various people had sent me things when, there's a chance this might be nominated. And I'm like, I don't think so. That's ridiculous. But then that was super exciting. I got to go to Berlin and, take part in the awards ceremony. I got to go up against Knizia. Neither of us won. So I was like, sweet. Knizia did not beat me, I can say. I didn't beat him either, but he didn't beat me. So that's cool. It was great. I felt very honored, and it's just it was very exciting, and I was glad our partner over there, Ravensburger, who's done the One Night Games and Werewords, and they're going to probably be doing Silver for us too. They were super excited about it, and it was just a really neat experience, and so that was awesome. Highly recommended. Win or not, it didn't really matter. I mean, the whole idea that some people just say, oh, it's just an honor to be nominated. Well, it really was. It was awesome. It was just fantastic. So,
did you think you were going to win?
No. I played Just One and Llama. I didn't think Llama could win, just because it didn't make sense. I don't know why I was nominated. It's not a bad game. It's just, why was it not nominated? It was fine. I played it a dozen times and enjoyed it, but I just was shocked it was nominated. But Just One there's something about Just One that is very compelling. And I figured, when they announced it, and Just One was there like right away. Like as soon as the announcement was there, I was like, well, they're going to win. It's just one of those things that kind of figured what was going on. Same thing with Wingspan, that I'm like, everything else isn't really, there's no way these other folks are going to take the prize here, with Wingspan being one of the things here. Whether you like Wingspan or not, I think the production values and it's a very, very polished game. And it is, I think it really kind of extols a lot of the virtues of what the KDJ is for. It's that light midweight game. It's really pretty. It works. It's fairly simple to learn. It just fit perfectly into that little slot for KDJ. So I was not surprised with either one of those things. There's always hope that, hey, maybe they'll pick Werewords instead, but I realized it was probably going to
Well,
be
and in fairness to Stonemaier and Wingspan, you two have a decent enough relationship that there was a collaboration. There was Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig that came about from Between Two Cities and
Yes.
Castles of Mad King Ludwig. And Joshian Gurr had a question. He was curious, in the spirit of that game, what other game mashup would you like to see? It could be your games, could be someone else's games. I don't know.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this. Jamie and I had just discussed, we could just, have a whole series of weird things like that.
Suburban Scythe. Oh, man. That rumor now. Let's go.
But the reality is, that was brought to us by two different designers. The designers that did Between Two Castles. That they brought it to Jamie first because they'd worked with him on Between Two Castles, and then he said, "You know what? This is great. I think I really doing or Between Two Cities, sorry." And then when they said, they love that, Jamie was a fan of Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which was really nice to know, and. They just did such a great job with it. And, Between Two Cities, I really like the innovative idea of, the working side by side with folks on that. But there were some scoring issues and things. And I was so excited when they came up with that it was it was a no-brainer. It wasn't let me go think about it. It was, yeah, let's do this. And so that was great. And Jamie, everyone knows Jamie's super awesome. He's great to work with. And, that we talked about, who should handle the production versus, one of us would be on the box, but we won't really do the production and vice versa. And it seemed to make a lot of sense because the gameplay is tied so much closer to Between Two Cities than it is Castles Mad King Ludwig, that it made sense for him to do it. Because those two games, Between Two Cities and Between Two Castles, could then kind of sit together and kind of be kind of a pair of things. So
my vote, by the way, is for Werewolf Viticulture. Yeah, you just have a werewolf sneaking around the vineyards, munching on people. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's
yeah.
Vegetarian werewolves. No, they don't actually eat anyone. It's just the players happen to be werewolves.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay.
BJ from War Game Gumbo was curious if Bezier could work with any designer that they have not already published to publish a new game, who would that designer be?
Wow. It's funny because when I think of designers, I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of different designers, and a lot of them are friends, and I've actually had, some really good success. I guess I'm going to say right now, Matt Leacock, because it just irritates me because there's a game of his that I'd like to publish and he won't let me do it because he doesn't think it's ready. And it irritates me. So I'll just
Matt, you're on notice.
There. So, I play tested Pandemic back in the day. I was in that Yahoo group where Matt used to work at Yahoo. He was the UI designer there. One of the UI designers there, not the UI designer, but one of the UI designers there. And the Yahoo, there's a group that met Mondays in the Yahoo cafeteria. And so that was a group that I went to on a regular basis, and Matt would go, and we each brought prototypes of things, and I played a couple of his prototypes. One I liked it more than Pandemic, but again, and that was that like more than 10 years ago now. It's really annoying. I just wish he would fix it and let me publish it. But I got to play Pandemic back then, which was really cool. I'm not a big fan of co-op games, but I still think Pandemic he just did such an amazing job with that. I also know that from working with Tom Lehman, who also is local to the Bay Area. He's also California before. And, I worked on him with him on Favor of the Pharaoh. And, he was telling me his stories about working with Matt on various things because Tom has done some Pandemic games with Matt and expansions and things. And, I've just known Matt for a long time. So, yeah, I would, I'd like Matt to basically let me publish that game.
Yeah, but specifically that game
would be fine too. But, yeah. I don't know. I really liked it. It really bothers me. He's like, no, it's missing something. And I'm like, okay, well, give it to me. We'll figure it out together. And he's like, I don't know.
Oh, man.
It's so frustrating. So
Chris McGowan was curious. Yeah. So for folks who don't know, Ted did a series of comics called Bored to Pieces. He's curious if there are any more new ones of those that will be coming down the pipe ever.
Probably not. You can probably find most of the archives of Board to Pieces, most of the comics, and you can look through them. They're very insidery, and they're kind of harsh. They're kind of mean in a lot of ways. And I look back, I'm like, oh man, that was nasty. Just as a game publisher and a designer, I've tried to be more neutral in terms of my criticisms of games at this point, just because it just doesn't. I'm a gamer, and I'm sure there's stuff I'm going to like and stuff I'm not going to like, but I don't like to just be harsh and mean on games. And I think there's a lot of undercurrent in the comic, which was, here's the sucky game, and I'm going to make fun of it, and that was not nice. It was fun, and there was a lot of fun stuff in there too. But I think that to me was kind of when I stopped that right before Suburbia was published, because I realized, well, I'm taking this a little bit more seriously now in terms of being a game designer and publisher, and I really can't have it both the ways. And for the most part, like I said, it's I can't be too harsh. I mean, there are games I just do not like, but at the same time, it's not probably my place to say that, just because more people would. That they might be impacted by something I would say, which isn't really fair, because I'm a gamer like everybody else. And my opinions are my opinions. Like I said, I don't like co-op games. I don't like really war games that much. But that doesn't mean they're not good, and people shouldn't, would enjoy to play them, that sort of thing. So Board to Pieces, unfortunately, kind of was all about games, and the good games, and the games I was interested in and I thought were great, and the games I didn't like, and that sort of thing. And so it probably will not come back.
Other question from him. Also, have you retired from designing Age of Steam maps?
Yeah, sorta. There's deep down inside, I still love Age of Steam. I am very excited about getting the deluxe edition or collector's edition, whatever it is, that I backed on Kickstarter that Eagle did, I don't know, a couple months ago. So I'm looking forward to that and playing. Probably won't do any more Age of Steam maps, but I am working on a train-ish game. So I am working on something that, I miss a lot of the Age of Steam. I miss playing Age of Steam and working on maps and things like that. And I think because of that, that's kind of bottled up inside. And so I've been working on some things towards that right now.
So we're wrapping up. I've taken up plenty of your time, but I do want to talk about Silver and Silver Bullet, because we have Essen basically happening right as this interview episode drops. And that's when Silver Bullet's going to be featured, if I'm not mistaken. And then Silver came out at Gen Con. So tell me a little bit about both of those games.
Yeah, so super excited. The Silver series of games, actually, there's the first two that are coming out this year, and next year we're going to have three more. They are very straightforward card games where the object is basically get rid of your cards and also reduce the number of points you have on the cards that are remaining in front of you. Whoever has the lowest score at the end of each round is going to basically win that round, and you play a few rounds and total up the scores, and the lowest score wins. Super, super simple concept, but the real fun part comes that every single card has some sort of special ability. And those special abilities can be really simple, like the ability to just view what your opponent's cards are, because the cards are secret. Even some of the cards are even secret from you to start with. But they can also be things like switching cards with other players, turning other players' cards face up or your own cards face up to activate other special abilities. And it's an incredibly dense, rich environment of things that can be done with such a very, very simple mechanic. And I found that it's the game has done amazingly well for us so far. It's just been released in stores just a few weeks ago, and it's always one of those things when a game comes out, we always check to see how well it's doing in places like Amazon or Cool Stuff or Miniature Market, places like that we can see online. And we talk to some game store owners too, and it sold out of its the first print run. The first thing that went to distributors was out within the first week, which was exciting. It sold out at Gen Con, and so that's very, very exciting and kind of validates our decision to make multiple versions of this game. So that was Silver that came out. Silver Bullet is same basic gameplay, the same idea that you're trying to reduce the points that you have in front of you and get rid of cards to help reduce those points. And each card has a special ability. But in this game, all the cards have new abilities. There's 14 different types of cards in each game, and Silver Bullet has 14 more. And while the Silver base game has kind of what we consider kind of the core basic abilities, Silver Bullet takes some of those and expands on them and then adds a whole bunch of new capabilities to it. So instead of things like just viewing other cards, you have things where you're adding a card to someone's tableau. So instead of they're trying to get rid of cards and you have a card that actually gives them an extra card. Or you have the ability to maybe put a card when you're discarding. Because normally when you discard a card, the player to your left might be able to pick it up. And sometimes you'll discard a good card, whether on purpose, sometimes accidentally, if you didn't know what the card was. One of the cards lets you stick it on the bottom of the deck so people can't get to it. A bunch of little things like that that are added to it that just really kind of widen up the possibilities. And the way that the games work is you can either play them by themselves, they're standalone games, or you can combine different cards from each of the decks. So you can take like the number 2, 4, and 6 out of Silver Bullet and put it in with the silver cards and take the 2, 4, and 6 out of the base game and play that way. And then kind of customize exactly the way you want to play. And I've been working on the third deck's actually, the third game's done. The fourth game is the one we're working on right now. And we're having just it's been such a fun thing to play test and work on, because you kind of have these core mechanics that were done and they're all working. And now it's just all the different things that we can do to kind of expand upon those and to change them. And it actually, in a way, kind of works like the way the Age of Steam expansion maps are. The Age of Steam had this great core set of rules, and each of those expansion maps tweaked the rules in some way and to make the game a little bit more interesting. And that's kind of what we're doing with Silver, is we have this base game idea, and each of these cards are tweaking things. And because you can combine all the different cards in different ways, it just opens up all these possibilities.
That's a lot of testing.
Really engaging.
That has to be a lot of testing when you're combining that many different abilities.
Yeah. It is. The interesting thing is we can figure out stuff right away. Even before playing, you can figure out like if there's going to be a problem or things. Once you actually get to playing, you realize that there's a problem here. Over time, it's going to be worse. We have, like I said, there are 5 decks that are guaranteed to be out this year and next. Probably going to do a few more because there's a bunch of cards that haven't been able to fit into those decks at this point. That's when it's going to start getting a little crazy, because that's going up to upwards of 100 cards or so that have to kind of make sure that they work, that there's no, if you play it with this other card, it doesn't actually break the system. So it's getting harder to work with those cards as we start.
3 more questions for you, Ted.
Games.
3 more. Question 1, what are you most excited about from Bezier next year? Any little insider information you can give me? Anything else brewing that you can tell me about?
Sure. I think I briefly mentioned it before, but there's a new game that'll be coming out next year. It's co-designed by Scott Caputo, who did Whistle Stop, and also by Luke Laurie, who did Manhattan Project, Energy Empire. And it's a follow-up to Whistle Stop, but it's very, very different. And it's a good chunky strategy game. We've been working on it for a couple of years now. It was supposed to come out this year, but then the whole Suburbia Collector's Edition kind of threw us for a little bit of a loop. We had to focus on that instead. But I'm super excited about that. That'll be coming out next year. There'll be more details on that forthcoming in the next couple of months. But that's probably the number one thing that I'm excited about. Everything else, obviously we're doing more Silver games, which I'm very excited about, having a lot of fun with those. But as far as brand new things go,
does it involve werewolves?
Scott Caputo Luke Laurie game.
Okay.
It does not involve werewolves. No, there are no werewolves. It is it's in the strategy side of our.
Well, you never know. You can have a strategy werewolf game. It's possible. Certainly possible.
Yeah,
biggest tip you would give to an aspiring designer or publisher, and I guess those would be different points of advice. So let me narrow it down to biggest point of advice you'd give to a designer. A designer who's trying to make a game that gets published ultimately.
Yeah, I think, and you'll hear this from a lot of designers who have been in for a while, but it's playtesting with as many different types of people as possible, as much playtesting as possible. There is, it's amazing. I'll think, well, I think I'm pretty good. This game is pretty good. I take it out for playtesting and I realize, wow, how could I possibly have missed this particular aspect, the strategy, this particular interaction that doesn't quite work the way I want it to. And it's because it's really impossible, for most games, even the more simple games, like One Night. It's amazing how differently people will play them that are outside your little bubble. We have, it's really fortunate we have a staff here that loves playing games. We do playtesting with them. We have some playtester groups. We have game groups. But I really get a lot out of taking games to people I don't know and, plopping them down and getting their feedback. And it's really insightful and it makes the game so much better. It is so easy, I think, as a designer, when people that like your game and you're like, wow, everybody really likes this. This is good. I'm gonna publish it. If you go that extra mile of getting a couple dozen extra play tests with people you don't know and just corralling them and just please sit down and play this and even tell me what you think, or just watching them play and seeing how they play, you get so many insights and your game becomes so much better. Your rules become better. I even have to tell that to myself sometimes when I'm so excited about, this is all working. Let's do this. And then I'm like, no, step back, play test. The more
final question I have, it's this final question I ask every single person I ever have on Holding Court. And it's a bizarre one. I'll give you that warning, Ted. So brace yourself. If you, Ted Alspach, could be any one flavor of ice cream, what flavor of ice cream would you be and why? It's not your favorite flavor. It's the flavor you want to
be. Okay, so this may seem weird, but I would probably say vanilla. Because while it may not be the most exciting thing, it works with pretty much everything. You can use vanilla ice cream with pretty much any other dessert. It works with other desserts. You can add all sorts of toppings to it. Whereas, ice cream, mint chocolate chip is probably my favorite flavor. There are certain things I wouldn't want to put on there, like caramel, which I like caramel, but mint chocolate chip and caramel probably not great. Not a great combination. Or sprinkles. I like sprinkles a lot too. But anyway, so I like that idea that just being able to be compatible and be able to work with a lot of different things. And so I think that vanilla seems like such a terrible, boring answer, but at the same time, I think it's probably one of the better things, just because
I will tell you, Jamie Stegmeier's answer to this did top yours. His answer was chocolate decadence. Yeah, it was his answer. It's also a great nickname for him.
Really?
But anyway, well, Ted, thank you for that answer, and thank you for your time here. If folks want to reach out or follow what the latest on what Bezier is up to, what's the best way for them to do that? All right,
just go to BezierGames.com.
Ted, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.